I knew when I was building this hoop house that I wanted to share with you exactly how I kind of came to the conclusions that I came to in terms of selecting the site and all the planning that I did in advance of actually building the hoop house. So basically, when we're planning something, we have this opportunity to kind of preemptively get ahead of any problems that we might have going into the project, which frees up so much more of our time and energy and space when we're actually building that project for the things that we couldn't have anticipated. So site selection is what we're going to be talking about today because it really is the key to making sure that your hoop house is going to be successful. If you don't have your site selection figured out, you're going to end up running into issues that you won't be able to fix down the road because it's going to be hard to move this once you've got everything already planted. So it's really important that we get this right. And I'm going to start by getting into the first consideration, which is actually sun exposure. With sun exposure, what we're looking for is to capture as much of that passive solar energy and heat as possible while it's in the sky, because of course we have shorter daylight hours, which we'll get into in a second. When we do have those shorter daylight hours, it means that we are fighting time to capture that heat. So how can we maximize the amount of heat that we're capturing? It has to do with the way that we're orienting the hoop house. So if you picture the hoop house as a rectangle, it's going to have short sides and long sides. And we want that long edge to be on an east to west axis. So that means that as the sun is traveling across the sky, you're going to get all of that shortened daylight sunlight throughout the entire day. And it's going to get trapped within the walls of the hoop house and sucked into the ground and held there overnight, so that hopefully the goal is we can keep our soil temperature at or above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And our second consideration is going to be shade. Now, shade is obviously less of a concern in the winter. The trees are bare, there's no leaves to cast that shade, but the sun is a lot lower in the sky. And so with it being lower, it's going to be blocked by things that it's not going to be blocked by right now. So whereas my hoop house today is in total direct sunlight, there is a line of trees here that's all along our property line. And that sun is going to be low enough that the tips of those trees may cause some additional shade on my hoop house. Now, I didn't really have a choice as to where I was going to put this. This was the best spot. So if you're in a situation where your best option is a place where you're dealing with some shade, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Just be mindful of it if you can. Now, this next one kind of trips some people up, sometimes literally. And it's a little bit hard to notice. So you're going to want to be making sure you're observing your land, because it's something that can be subtle but have a dramatic effect. And that is noticing the grade of your land. The grade of your land is basically the slope, right? Your property probably has high points and low points. And you want to find a place that's as level as possible so that you don't experience drainage issues. Now, I've lived on this property for most of my life. I actually share it with my parents. So I'm pretty familiar already from having observed this place for so many years, where water tends to collect, the dry spots, the wet spots. And I am actually building the hoop house on a slope. So again, another example of why you don't need to have a perfect scenario, a perfect setup to build your hoop house, but it's important to be aware of the downsides that you might be dealing with. So in my case, I do have the potential for shade from that tree line, and I do have the potential, because I'm building on a slope, to be dealing with some additional drainage issues. I've observed this area extensively. It's not the lowest point. It is a lower point, but it's not the lowest. So water continues to drain behind me. As you can see, it kind of slopes down. And this last tip isn't really about site selection, but you can't make these decisions until you've made your site selection, because it's going to be limited by where you choose to put the hoop house. And that's going to be the actual size and shape of your hoop house. You'll be limited by a couple different things. First of all, the location, of course, but then as well, your materials and your budget, which are kind of intertwined. So in my case, I wanted to show a really accessible way that you could build this, but I wanted to show you a way that anyone could do this regardless of your budget. So I'm using the cattle panels, which does limit my shape and size because they only come in standard lengths. So my cattle panels are about 16 feet long and maybe like 4.5 feet wide. So that means that any length of hoop house that I want to do is going to be in those increments of 4.5 feet, right? Because if I cut down that wire cattle panel, it's going to leave rough edges that could catch on my greenhouse plastic, which I don't think is really worth the risk. So I want to keep it intact in their original shape and sizes. And that means that for the length, I ended up at about 12 feet, 13 feet because of how I used 3 panels in a row. And then in terms of the height, I was limited again because I wanted to make it so that I could still stand up in the middle of the structure. And in order to be able to stand up, I could only make it so wide when I bent the panels down. So it ended up being 7 feet wide, which is really just enough space because you can have 2 30-foot rows, one on either side, and a 24-inch path, which is really comfortable. Of course, you may have other limitations. Where you pick your location is going to dictate how large your hoop house can be as well. So this is another thing that is going to be specific to your scenario, but if you have any specific questions about the layout that you're trying to come up with, let me know in the comments. So all of these considerations are going to be equally important. The passage of the sun, the amount of shade that you're going to get, the actual grade of your land, and the size of your hoop house are all things that you're going to want to have locked down before you start making a list of materials, going shopping, and building. Now, I've already done all of these things, so next up I am going to be building the hoop house and walking you through exactly how I did it, and you don't need to know anything about building to make this work. It was so easy, I'm telling you. The hardest part was just you need another person to help you bend those panels. So really, really simple process. We're going to make it really cute too, though, as well. So make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss that next episode about the build. That's going to be where we get into the real nuts and bolts of how this is going to work. Hit the like button if this was helpful, and let me know in the comments if there's anything else you want me to cover.